Good morning, good afternoon or good evening, wherever you might be watching. Let's look at one of the most powerful features in all of Excel. That is the creation of pivot tables. A pivot table allows me to analyze data. In this particular worksheet, you'll notice that there are salespeople, the years in which they made sales, the type of sales, the region, the number of units that they sold, and also a sales value. Now, what we need to do is to understand the rules that Excel needs to take care of, or that we need to take care of for Excel, to enable the data to be pivoted and then analysed. The first thing I need to do is to make certain that I have labels for the data. That's logical. Above the labels must be a blank row, unless the labels are in row 1. In this case, they're not in row 1, so I need to make sure that there is a blank row above the labels. Secondly, I need to ensure that there are no blank rows in the data, and that there are no blank columns anywhere in the data. I can see that in this particular worksheet that there are no blank rows or blank columns. So the next thing I need to ensure is that I click somewhere in the pivot table, and then in the Insert tab I click on Pivot Table. Excel opens up the Create Pivot Table window, and it guesses at the range that I need to have for my pivot table by surrounding its guess with a scrolling marquee. In this case, because there are no blank rows or columns within the data, it stops at the first empty column, and it is also stopped at the first blank row below. Excel suggests that I might like to put my pivot table on a new worksheet. This is a good idea because it makes working with the pivot table just that much easier. Now when I click OK, I see what pops up is the pivot table itself and the pivot table field list. At the moment the pivot table is empty, but all I need to do is over here in the pivot table field list to drop the fields down into the various areas that I want to see them. So I'm going to drag the salesperson field down, and the pivot table immediately starts to become constructed. I might like to see the region that the sales were made in, so I'm going to drag the region down and put them in as column labels. This area here, the values area, is reserved for those fields that have numbers in them, numbers or dollar amounts. So I'm going to drag the sales down and drop them into the values area. And by default, Excel adds the various numbers for me, so I can see that Buchanan had total sales of $178,000, 198,000 odd, etc. Now just imagine if you had to work out what, let's say, Buchanan's sales for the southern region were back here in the raw data. It would take some time and probably be very prone to mistakes. So the pivot table enables me to analyze data very quickly and efficiently. Now I might also like to see the type of sales that were made. So I'm going to drag the type of sales down and drop them under the salesperson. Now I see there are the type of sales, there are the areas that the sales were made in. The totals still remain the same, but I can see more of the data for analysis purposes. Again, pivot tables are great for analysis because I can see here, for example, that the salesperson Suyama had dairy sales in the northern region of $36,000 odd. Now, where does the word pivot come from? Well, it comes from this little area down here, because if I don't like the way things are appearing here, then I could, for example, drop the region down by dragging it down underneath the type. Okay, now that's possibly not the best way to see things, so I might drag the type up into the column labels. So I'm purely pivoting the fields around this central point here, which enable me to see the data as I want to see it. There's no golden rule, it's a matter of how you want to see the data. Now, I decide, for whatever reason, that I just want to analyse the salesperson's sales by just the type. I don't want to see the region, so I can either drag the region off back where it came from or untick the region here. And there I go, I see the salespeople now, but just with the type of produce, beverages, dairy, meat and produce that they sold, still the grand totals showing. I'm also able to drag another sales field down into the values area, because this time, I'll just move that out of the way, this time I want to see a count of the sales. So what I can do here, in any sum of sales to cell, I right click on that cell and summarize data by a count, and it shows me the count of the sales that each of those salespeople made. What I could do for analysis purposes, I could drop the type off back where it came from. There's my count of sales for each of the salespeople for the particular sales that they made. Once I've analysed the data, I can drag this one off if I don't need it anymore and drop it up back to where it came from. So I'm just left with the sum of sales. Now remember that we're using a pivot table to analyse data. What if I wanted to see, for example, the highest sale that each person made? What I can do is drag another sales field down in here, right click on the sum of sales to, summarize data by, and I'll go to max, that is the maximum, the highest sale that anybody made, and there they are. So again, I could analyze. So if I was a sales manager, I could call Mr. Devolio into the office and say, look, your highest sale was 10,392. That's not too bad. Perhaps you could improve on that in the days to come. You'll notice at the moment that the sum of sales, my apologies, that the field list has disappeared. That's because I have clicked outside of the pivot table itself. If I click in the pivot table, I see that the field list returns for me. So remember, click outside, there is no pivot table field list visible. Click anywhere inside the data and back comes the pivot table field list. Well, I've looked at the highest sale, so I've finished with that for analysis purposes. I'll drop it off back where it came from. I decide that I want to analyse the data by looking at the region in which the sales were made. So I'm going to drop the region down into there, and here is where I see where the word table comes from in the pivot table. As in any Excel table, I see that I can filter. So if I click the filter button here, that shows me that I can unselect all and just select a particular salesperson, the one that I want to analyse, and click OK. So now it's hidden the other two salespeople and only show me the person that I have selected. To put the other two people back, I now click on the filter button here, which has changed its design, and I will clear the filter from the salesperson, or I could select all and then click OK. I generally clear the filter from the salesperson there, saves me a click, and there I see that everybody is back where they came from. I also notice here that there's a little grouping button here. It's a minus at the moment in each case. This allows me to hide the details of any particular field in the in the pivot table. So if I just want to see Suyama and not filter out the other two, I could simply hide their details. The plus sign brings them back. What I could lesson, we've seen how we can create the pivot table, the rules that I need to follow. Remember, no blank rows, no blank columns. You can have blank cells in the data, but no blank rows or columns. There must be an empty row above the labels unless the labels are in row number 1. We've seen how we can pivot around a particular point here in the field list, and how I can use the filter buttons to filter my data. This is the first lesson in creating pivot tables. Make sure you master this one, and I'll include a link on the video so that you can go to lesson 2 when you are ready.